modern mind's assumption that everything about the world is ultimately understandable in such a way that it can be calculated, predicted, and potentially controlled. That quality of mystery and soul has been withdrawn. One way of kind of showing the difference would be to take the primal perspective. When a primal person, from traditional indigenous cultures, when they would walk out into the world, they would experience spirits in the forest and presences in the wind and in the ocean.
The worldviews of the pre-industrial cultures all have tremendous spiritual focus. Spirituality is an important dimension of existence. Besides what we perceive in everyday life, there are also invisible dimensions of reality, sort of inhabited by, what we can call today archetypal beings, realms that have these archetypal mythological dimension.
Archetype, an autonomous form in the primordial psyche that structures and impels all human behavior and experience.
Well, archetypes are principles that really inform the whole history of Western thought. I mean, it's kind of the concept around which Western philosophy and later psychology revolves. Behind the Platonic understanding are the gods and goddesses of the ancient imagination, so that you have basically, let's say with beauty, it's personified as Aphrodite in the Greek mythic imagination. In the Platonic understanding, in the ancient understanding, the entire cosmos can be seen as governed in this way. But by the time you get to the modern era, archetypal principles, or gods and goddesses, are seen as the result of human projection or human generalizations. Our mind imposes on the chaos of phenomena certain ordering principles which ultimately come from the subject. So from this primal point of view, there is a continuity between the human interior consciousness and the interior of the world. And the human being can participate in the soul of the world because the world is ensouled.
The Western worldview is very, very different. The pragmatic, materialistic worldview is very different. The only reality is the material world. These other dimensions that the native cultures are interested in, they are either sort of result of some kind of a lack of education, primitive magical thinking, or they are outright psychopathology. It involves direct experiences of these states.
The primal perspective is enchanted, and the modern perspective is that of a disenchanted world. Now, how did this shift happen? I mean, what I've just described is something that is particularly evident from the time of Descartes. Later 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century science and philosophy is basically disenchanted, by and large, with the exceptions of the religious statements that Einstein will make, or that you have a Whitehead or a Teilhard. But by and large, modern science has disenchantment built right into its essential point of view.
The Achuar peoples are also interesting because they practice collective dreaming. Every morning they wake up and they share the content of their dreams. And they do this because they believe that nobody dreams for the individual. I mean, they have individual dreams, but their larger purpose is to help them understand the collective experience. So a person will wake up in the morning and they'll share a bit of their dream, and then somebody else will share, and somebody else will share. And it's usually the elder of the household unit that then interprets this. And they come up with a collective interpretation of their individual experiences in such a way that they use it to predict their practice. So should they go hunting today? Should they go fishing? Will there be visitors? Should they travel? Will there be danger? These kinds of insights about the future come through the sharing of dreams. So it's not just a luxury to share your dreams with one another, but it's actually a social responsibility. So subjectivity is highly honored and esteemed for its reliability, rather than suspect for its unreliability because it can't be easily measured.
The modern disenchanted perspective didn't emerge completely ex nihilo with the 17th century and Descartes. It was prepared for by the whole evolution of Homo sapiens, going back to the first use of tools, the first linguistic and religious civilizations. You begin to have the differentiation of the human self as a subject acting upon the world as an object. So that's kind of begins the whole process that leads to the kind of radical disenchantment that we have in our time, the objectification of the world.
We have been living in a society that separates us, and we assume that, you know, as a human being, we are these isolated entities contained within this skin and, you know, this body. And yet other cultures see it very differently. And there are more and more reasons to believe that it is a more relational rather than isolated world we live in. And relational at some really core fundamental levels. You know, it's not only about recognizing the importance of living in society and living in right relationship in terms of our social intercourse, but really recognizing that perhaps we are all part of a more complex, interconnected system that isn't simply physical, but that actually may have some metaphysical or transpersonal components or qualities.
Well, the notion of an interconnected world rather than a world of objects is you know, both new and old, very old. Thomas Berry said, we're moving from a world seen as a collection of objects to a world recognized as a communion of subjects. When you recognize that everything has its own inherent subjectivity, that is consciousness, that is spirit. That's what the native indigenous people, shamanistic societies would say. Everything has spirit and consciousness. And you treat it that way. Not quite correct to say it's communication, because communication applies A to B. Communion is much closer than that. See, and as spirits, we commune always telepathically with another being. We merge our consciousness. We merge our consciousness. It's sort of like love. You feel like you're in the same consciousness as somebody else.
Interconnectivity is the ascending archetype, I think, of the 21st century, 21st century, this discovery of this profound interlaced quality of existence at all physical and spiritual and mental, psychological levels.
The modern worldview is being replaced by, some people call it a postmodern, but I think it's ridiculous. You could say it's a systems worldview. And the modern worldview is mechanistic and atomistic and linear causality and quantitative, and the only real realm is the realm of measurable objects and forces. Everything else, that means images in your mind, thoughts, intuitions, imaginations, symbols, anything that, dreams, anything that is merely subjective. Values is merely subjective. Values are not objective. Therefore, we can have a science that can make bombs and obliterate thousands, all this kind of thing, and devastate the atmosphere, and we can say, well, we're scientists, we don't deal with values, that's politics, you see, and economics.
Our crisis is a birth. It's a birth of this new humanity that's been prefigured in the mystics, but now going to be pressured by the crisis. It took all of those years for the crisis to mature.
Entrainment, the phenomenon whereby energy systems tend to become harmonic while in proximity.
Rhythm and dance, you know, are among the most primal expressions of a culture and of the communal tribal bonding.
Music may be older than language. So in a sense, music may be the most ancient of human activities, and it very well may be the case that